What would you do if your own family called you unstable while secretly laundering money in your name? My name is Erica Monroe. I'm 44 years old, and for more than 2 decades I served in the United States Army Cyber Command. My job was never loud. It didn't come with medals in public ceremonies or movie-style heroics. It came with silence. Silence and encrypted networks. Darkness. Windowless rooms where the air smelled like cold metal and stale coffee. Where threats whispered in lines of code and danger never wore a face. I stopped things most people never knew were about to destroy them. Rogue malware, foreign infiltration, real espionage. But none of it, not even war, prepared me for the betrayal I'd face at the hands of my own bloodline. This isn't about revenge. This is about truth, the kind that cracks a courtroom in half with one sentence. It started with a will, a hearing. Supposed to be procedural, quiet, a final step in settling my father's estate. I wore my uniform out of respect. I thought it would be a formality. But when I stepped into that courthouse in Arlington, I felt it. Not silence, absence of trust, of loyalty, of family. My mother, Margaret, sat without looking up, her eyes fixed on the floor like my presence was a stain. Jason. My younger brother was already seated at the front with his wife, Alyssa, their hands locked like they were grieving victims, not perpetrators. Our father, Franklin Monroe, had only been in the ground 6 months, and already the knives had been sharpened. Their attorney, Helen Draper, stood first, voice like a scalpel, precise, polished, poisoned. Your Honor, she began, we submit that Colonel Erica Monroe poses a risk to the fiduciary integrity of the Monroe family estate. Her emotional volatility paired with her elevated rank created an imbalance of influence. We believe she unduly pressured Mr. and Mrs. Monroe into financial transfers while on leave from active deployment. The words weren't loud, but they echoed like explosions. Unduly pressured, volatile, manipulative. They were using my uniform, the very fabric I bled for, against me. I said nothing. I didn't flinch when Jason said she was never around. She missed everything. Birthdays, holidays. When Dad got sick, I was the one who stayed. I didn't blink when Alyssa said she makes people uncomfortable. She has that intensity. I didn't look away when my own mother murmured, "We tried to help her, but some people just can't be helped. Let them talk." That was my thought. Let them twist the years. Let them weaponize my service. They had no idea what I knew. When the judge turned to me, asking if I had any documentation to submit before a ruling, I stood slowly. The sound of my boots on tile was soft, but deliberate. I had walked across war zones quieter than this courtroom. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, standard government print. Nothing fancy. Your Honor, I said, voice calm. With your permission, I believe this document should be reviewed before any further proceedings. He took it, adjusted his glasses, read the first line. His brow furrowed. Second line. His eyes narrowed. Third line, he looked up sharply. Closed the doors. No one leaves. Gasps. Confusion. Even Helen Draper dropped her pen. I watched as the bailiff moved toward the rear exit, locking it. Then came the boots. Not mine. Federal agents, 5 of them. Clean suits, precise movements. They came through the side hall. My mother paled. Jason turned and finally looked me in the eyes. Alyssa clutched his arm like she'd seen her own name flash on a warrant. But I didn't move. I didn't blink. Because this moment, this courtroom silence, this sudden cold, I'd waited years for this. But it didn't start in the courtroom. It started 3 months ago, on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday you forget the kind with cold coffee, a news app, and bare feet on kitchen tile. The subject line hit me first. Confirmation of Veteran Relief Disbursement. Monroe Case ID 1430X. I hadn't applied for relief. My benefits were intact. My finances stable. I lived alone in a paid-off brick home in Northern Virginia. So I clicked. And then I saw it. My full name, my military ID, my deployment history, my home address, and a payment $38,000 already processed, sent to a bank account I didn't recognize. I didn't panic. No adrenaline, no shouting, just a cold drop behind my ribs, the kind of knowing you only get when something has already happened. I made one call, an old contact in federal finance, a man who owed me one last favor. Within the hour, I had access to a ledger, and what I saw wasn't just personal, it was surgical. 3 months earlier, the deed to my parents' house, the home I quietly paid off after my third deployment, had been transferred to a company named Stratex Solutions, LLC. The name scratched a memory. Jason Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Bragging over pumpkin pie about a side hustle doing digital consulting. I'd tuned him out, thought it would crash like his other ventures. But it hadn't crashed. It had taken everything. The house, the trust, the titles. All transferred without my name. That night I drove over, not out of rage, out of strategy. The lights were on. Inside, Alyssa curled on the couch with a glass of wine, watching a true crime show with the ironic comfort of someone who never expects to be caught. Jason sat in the armchair, scrolling his phone. I held up the deed transfer. "What is this?" He glanced at it, shrugged. "Just cleanup. For taxes. It's all clean. My name's gone." "Yeah," he said, casually. "You don't live here anymore. Why would you be on anything I helped pay for that house?" He smiled, past tense. I turned to my mother. She didn't answer. Eventually, she said Jason explained it. "It's for the family." "His family?" I asked. No one replied, not even Alyssa, just a pitying look like I was a fragile ant interrupting movie night. I left. No shouting, no tears, only silence. A colder kind than I'd felt in any war zone. That night, I sat in the guest room of a home I'd once helped save. I didn't journal, I didn't cry. I opened a blank notepad, and I wrote names, dates, accounts, file numbers. I wasn't grieving. I was building a case, and they had no idea who they were up against. 2 weeks later, the envelope arrived, thick, heavy, weighted like guilt in paper form. My name on the front, Erica Monroe. No rank, no colonel, just ink and erasure. Return address, Rowan Family Council, Gatlin Reeds and Lewis, LLP. I didn't flinch when I opened it. The first line hit like a slow knife. Plaintiff Jason Monroe. Defendant Erica Monroe. 'Cause alleged misuse of family assets. Emotional distress. Undue influence. I read it 3 times. My fingers didn't shake, but the kitchen chair felt colder than ever before. They weren't just trying to cut me out. They were trying to destroy my credibility. They claimed that during my leave from deployment, I manipulated our parents, confused them with my military stature and domineering persona. They said I pressured them to hand over financial control. I didn't even know I had financial control. I hadn't touched the trust. I hadn't wanted to. But they needed a story, so they made one. By noon, the story hit local news. By dinner time, it was regional. Photos of me in uniform, carefully chosen, staring into a camera, mid-briefing jaw, tight eyes hard. Decorated Army officer sued by own family. War hero or financial predator. Allegations mount against Colonel Monroe. The news didn't care for context. It cared for clicks. Old colleagues texted. Some asked what was happening. Others didn't text at all. Silence began to surround me again, not protective this time, but withdrawing. Even the Army responded. A formal email. Administrative leave recommended while resolving personal matters. I accepted. Not because I was broken, because I needed space. Not to cry, to work. I spent the next 72 hours building a digital map. Every bank record I could legally access, every property file, every digital footprint tied to the Monroe Family Trust. I looped in 2 people, Miles Carter and Natalie Park, both former intelligence, both off the grid by choice, not force. We didn't talk sentiment. We built timelines. We built truth. And the truth was rotten. 3 months before the lawsuit, someone withdrew a lump sum from the family trust just under the threshold that would alert federal regulators. That sum was then split across 6 dummy accounts, filtered into donations to a foundation called the Phoenix Haven Foundation, and finally redirected to Stratex Solutions, LLC, Jason's little startup. It looked clean until you pulled the threads. Alyssa Monroe's name was everywhere. She was the director of Phoenix Haven. She'd applied for veteran-focused grants, trauma healing funds, emergency relief for PTSD survivors. But I recognized one name instantly, Oliver P. Grant. He wasn't a patient. He was a medic who bled out on the back of a convoy in Helmand Province. In 2012, I'd attended his funeral. Now his name was being used to apply for therapy grants. I didn't want to believe it. So I verified. I found 8 more names, men and women I had served with, some alive, others buried. Their identities were being used, their records mimicked, their service weaponized, not by a hacker in Moscow, by my own family. The deception was precise, but not precise enough. They used real data, sensitive, specific, classified, the kind of information not available to the public, and I knew where they got it. Me. They used my clearances, my logins, my military record. My name was the disguise. Their fraud wore my medals. For the first time in years, I felt it, that cold constriction in the chest. Not fear, not anger, betrayal. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't broken. I was being used. The same uniform they were trying to paint as a weapon, they were hiding behind it. I didn't cry. I opened a secure line. Contacted Miles and Natalie. We met 3 hours outside D.C. in a borrowed hunting cabin with no internet, no cell signal, just firewood thermoses and 3 laptops hardened against intrusion. I laid it all out. Shell companies, grant fraud, identity exploitation. Miles leaned back. Natalie said nothing for 10 minutes. Then Miles spoke. "This isn't just embezzlement," he said. "It's a national security breach. They're not stealing money. They're selling access." I already knew. It wasn't about my family anymore. It was about infiltration, and the traitors were using veteran identities to do it. One name stood out: Virex Holdings, a consulting firm. Jason's company paid for data processing, registered in the Cayman Islands. I remembered that name from a classified report in 2021, suspected of laundering data stolen from NATO cyber bases. Now it was sitting in a spreadsheet with my brother's name and mine. I didn't speak for a long time. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Is this treason?" Miles nodded. "Not yet," he said, "but it will be." And the clock just started. That night, I sat by my apartment window watching headlights blur in silence. The most dangerous battlefield I'd ever faced wasn't Kabul or Ramadi. It was Thanksgiving dinner. It was a living room filled with pitying looks and polite lies. And that's when I made my decision. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. They weren't going to walk away. Not this time. Not with my name on their crimes. It wasn't about paperwork anymore. It was about warfare, quiet, systemic, and domestic. And the battlefield was me. I didn't launch an attack. Not yet. First, I made a list. Every fake veteran ID used by the Phoenix Haven Foundation. Every invoice Stratex Solutions submitted for consulting and data infrastructure. Every transaction that hit offshore accounts. Every timestamp that aligned with my deployments. I wasn't building a story. I was building proof, the kind that crushes deniability. And I still had one unanswered question: did my parents know? So I made an appointment. Not with Jason, not with Alyssa, with Margaret Monroe, my mother. She answered the door herself, wore a cream sweater, a blank expression, and years of distance behind her eyes. Behind her, my father, Franklin Monroe, stood with folded arms, silent. The house looked the same, but everything inside it had changed. We sat in the living room like strangers. I placed a folder on the table. "Before you say anything," I told them, "I know everything." I let the words settle. The identity fraud, the grants, the offshore redirection. I know you both signed authorization letters giving Jason and Alyssa full trust access. No one moved. Then I asked the real question. Did you ever stop to think what this would do to me? My mother looked down. My father looked away. Then she spoke, voice flat. "You were always distant, even before the army. Always closed off, I served," I said quietly, while Jason used the trust like an ATM. My father's voice was low, measured. "Sometimes you choose the child who stays." The words landed like a blade, clean. unapologetic, not about fairness, about convenience. I stood up, gathered the folder. "You made your choice," I said. "Now I'll make mine." That night, back in my apartment, I encrypted everything. The data logs, the transactions, the clearance breach details. I sent a message on a line I hadn't used in 7 years. "It's happening." The reply came within the hour. "We're in." By morning, I was in a hangar, empty, quiet. A repurposed Army intel site 3 hours from D.C. There were 4 of us now. Me, Miles, Natalie, and an old contact from cyber defense named Grant. We didn't waste time. We mapped it all. Phoenix Haven wasn't just a non-profit. It was a front. Every veteran was a used identity. Many dead, several compromised. Money was funneled through Stratex for technical processing, passed to shell accounts tied to foreign corporate entities, some flagged on interagency cyber-terrorist watch lists. The entry points used for most breaches matched logs from my previous assignments. My credentials had been cloned, then rerouted via internal backdoors. They weren't stealing money anymore. They were using my security clearance as a mask to build an access pipeline into U.S. defense networks. It wasn't just criminal, it was federal espionage. One file caught my eye, an email forwarded from Alyssa to a consultant in Belgium. The subject line was buried in code. Inside a message, "Package secured, clearance updates pending, awaiting extraction." I froze. Package, clearance, extraction. They weren't just selling information. They were selling doors, entryways into systems meant to stay locked forever. I was the disguise, and they thought I'd never see it. That night, I sat by my laptop screen surrounded by silent proof, not just of betrayal, of treason, and it was wearing my name badge. I stared at the headline on my phone one last time: "Army Officer Faces Family Lawsuit." I smiled without warmth. Soon it would read differently. The plan was simple: submit no defense. Let their lawyer build her false case. Let Alyssa cry on cue. Let Jason look noble. Let the judge ask me for a final word. Hand him one document, and then watch the doors close. They thought silence meant surrender. They forgot I was trained in silence, and I never went into battle unarmed. The morning of the hearing, I woke before the alarm. My uniform was pressed, polished. Not for image, for clarity. Rows of ribbons. My Army Cyber Command insignia. A nameplate I'd earned, not inherited. Every inch of fabric whispered one truth: I was not afraid of what they'd done to me. The courthouse was full. Jason arrived, flanked by Alyssa and 2 defense attorneys. Alyssa wore a beige blazer, the kind people choose when they want to look concerned but not guilty. Helen Draper, their lawyer, carried a steel briefcase and a confident smirk. My mother and father sat behind them, stoic, unfeeling, like statues of loyalty cast in cold metal. I didn't look their way. I took my place, alone, but not unarmed. Helen stood and began her performance. She cited my deployments as extended absences from critical family moments. She cited my rank as a position of psychological dominance. She called my demeanor intimidating, erratic, and inconsistent with fiduciary responsibility. She used the words emotional trauma and battle-induced instability. She painted me as a ticking time bomb dressed in uniform. Then she stepped aside. Alyssa took the stand. She was polished, precise, soft voice, controlled tears. She was always intense, she said, always watching, analyzing. I never felt safe around her. I hate saying it, but she scared me. She paused for effect, looked down, fake shame. She was distant, aggressive, always correcting people, always, waiting to pounce. The courtroom was quiet. The judge, a man named Judge Hardin, watched carefully, measured everything. I remained still. Not a blink, not a breath wasted. Let them paint their masterpiece, because I brought the match. Finally, Judge Hardin turned to me. "Colonel Monroe, do you have any defense or documents to submit before we proceed to ruling?" I stood, straight-backed, shoulders squared, voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor." From my leather case, I pulled out one folder. Slim, simple. Inside, just one document. "Your Honor," I said. "This is my only submission." He took it, opened it, read. line 1. Eyes narrowed, line 2. Brow furrowed, line 3. He looked up. Close the doors, he said. No one leaves. Gasps. Chairs scraping. Jason blinked hard, leaned forward. Alyssa froze her mouth slightly open. Their attorneys turned to one another in confusion. Behind me, I heard it. Boots. Federal agents entering through both side doors, precise, silent, trained. 5 men and women in dark suits and earpieces. They didn't hesitate. They walked directly to Jason and Alyssa. Handcuffs clicked. Alyssa tried to stand. 2 agents flanked her. Jason stammered, "Wait, no I didn't. This was..." He looked at me. "They made me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't reply because I understood something too well. They made him, but he let them. Judge Hardin remained composed. On the basis of this document, he said, and the accompanying evidence now in possession of federal authorities, this court recognizes that substantial criminal activity has been committed under the guise of family trust management and nonprofit service. He turned to the remaining counsel. The charges will include identity theft, financial fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to exploit federal veteran services. Jason was pale. Alyssa had gone from soft to steel jaw-clenched eyes dead. Margaret Monroe covered her mouth. Franklin didn't move. I watched them both. Still statues, still choosing silence over justice. The same silence they had when they chose Jason. As Jason and Alyssa were led out of the room, past me, past everyone, past the lies, I didn't feel triumph. I felt truth, finally standing where it belonged. The hearing was over. But the war, the one that began the day I saw my name erased from the house I paid off, that war had been won, not with fists, with facts, not with rage, with restraint, not with screaming, with one document written in cold ink delivered in earned silence. The courtroom emptied, except for me. I didn't leave right away. I stood near the judge's bench while the agents filed out Jason and Alyssa in custody, their footsteps swallowed by the cold marble corridors. Reporters had gathered outside. Microphones, flashbulbs, headlines already in the making, but I didn't give them a quote. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for me. Later that afternoon, I filed 3 emergency motions protective orders for all 8 veterans whose identities were compromised. An injunction to freeze all assets tied to the Phoenix Haven Foundation and Stratex Solutions, LLC. A federal referral to Homeland Security for all offshore entities, flagged in the case file. Each one was granted, without hesitation. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I filed the paperwork, turned off my phone, and walked out of the courthouse with no one beside me. And that was exactly how I wanted it. That evening, I sat in my apartment, lights off, uniform folded on the bed, court documents in a neat stack on my desk. My name, once smeared across headlines, now appeared at the top of a federal exoneration file. The headline was different now. Army Colonel exposes massive fraud, Ring family members indicted in veteran's identity theft case. I didn't care for the clicks or the shares, but I printed that headline and I placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Weeks passed. I didn't go back to Army Cyber Command. Not because they didn't ask, because I was building something new. Honor Trace. That's what I called it. A nonprofit organization dedicated to defending veterans from financial exploitation, identity abuse, and trust betrayal. No fanfare, no launch party. Just a name, a mission, and quiet power behind a locked door. I hired a 3-person team, all former intel, all trusted. We started with 1 case, then 3. By week 2, we had 11. Stolen benefits, misused identities, names of heroes turned into numbers on balance sheets. One morning, a letter arrived, handwritten, from a widow in Ohio. Her husband, a decorated combat medic, had died in 2015. His name had been used by Jason's network to funnel money through dummy nonprofit donations. She wrote, "We thought no one would fight for us. Then you did." I sat with that line for a long time. Because this war, this quiet digital war, had never been about revenge. It had been about remembering who I was. Not the image they created, not the caricature in court, but the woman behind the firewall, the one who never asked for applause, never needed credit, only truth, only integrity. They tried to call me unstable. They tried to paint my service as a threat. They tried to erase my name, but I wrote it back in with evidence. There was no parade, no medals, no public ceremony, just a new desk, a locked cabinet, and a folder with the words, VA confirmed, identity restored, 12 veterans. It didn't feel like a victory march. It felt like a healing scar. Because I finally understood something I hadn't admitted even to myself. The betrayal wasn't just legal, it was personal. And I had spent years excusing it. They were my family. That's what I used to tell myself. Jason was just trying to prove himself. Alyssa was just protecting her husband. My mother, she was old-fashioned, loyal to the child who stayed. But loyalty shouldn't require abandoning your principles, and love shouldn't mean turning a blind eye to treason. In the weeks after the hearing, I received dozens of emails, some from strangers, others from former soldiers I hadn't spoken to in years. They said, I didn't know you were fighting for us, but we saw what you did. Thank you. And not one of those messages said, I'm sorry for what they did to you. And that was okay, because I didn't fight for apologies. I fought for clarity, for the simple, brutal truth. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to fight back with fists when you have evidence and conviction. And when they try to bury your name, your worth, your purpose, you don't beg to be seen. You make them look. Months later, I stood outside the very house I once helped pay off the one they tried to erase me from. A for sale sign was staked into the front lawn. The lights were off. The porch cracked, the windows dusty. No one had touched it in months. Jason was still under investigation. Alyssa had fled public view. My mother had gone quiet. My father moved to Florida. The Monroe house was just a shell now, like the lie it was built on. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who begged for a seat at the table, who sent quiet checks and hoped for thank you texts. I was Erica Monroe, and my name no longer needed to be spoken by them. It spoke for itself. Back at Honor Trace, we finished encrypting another case veteran fraud in a southern district using stolen VA credentials. The system tried to stay ahead, but so did we. And we were faster, quieter, sharper. That night, I turned off my office light. The sun had already gone down. The only sound was the low hum of a monitor cooling. I sat for a moment, breathed, and in that stillness, not silence, but earned stillness, I smiled. Not because I won, but because I knew who I was, and nothing, not a courtroom, not a headline, not even my own blood could take that away. Some betrayals don't come with slammed doors or screaming matches. Sometimes they wear familiar faces and speak in calm voices while stealing your worth. But when that moment comes, when they try to write you out of your own story, make sure you've already written the truth somewhere they can't erase it. Have you ever had to defend your name against your own family? Tell your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's been underestimated. This isn't just a story, it's a reminder. Your silence is not your weakness, it's your weapon.